Over the years, I've made hundreds of different videos talking about Turo. I've talked about the cars to buy, the cars to avoid, best practices, news and updates, but the other day it hit me that I've actually never made a video on how to start a Turo business, or at least the different methods that you can use to start one. I've only really talked about how I did it, and the reality is that though the way that I did it is one of the many different methods you can pursue, it certainly isn't the only path you can go down. So in this video, we're going to be talking about just that, and I'm going to be breaking down the 4 different methods that you can look towards if you're somebody who's wanting to start your own fleets. All of these different methods cater to somebody that may have money to invest, that may not have money to invest, that may have access to a car, that may not have access to a car. It will really cater to any type of situation you could think of. So let's get started. Now, whenever we talk about starting a Turo business, the number one aspect of the equation is getting access to a car. You obviously cannot start a Turo fleet without a car, and so because of that, that is sort of the missing piece of the puzzle. Without a car, you can't start a fleet. But the thing is that there's actually a lot of different ways that you can go about getting access to this vehicle. It doesn't have to be one that you personally fund or that you personally own, though it definitely can be, and in my case, it absolutely was. With that being said, let's dig into the very first one that I want to talk about, which is using your personal car first. Now, this is actually the method that I pursued in order to start my very own Turo fleet. This is something I've talked about on this channel before, but it was how I got started on Turo in 2017, which is nearly 5 years ago, which is crazy to think about. So I started my Turo fleet with my personal Jeep Wrangler. It was actually a car that I had purchased about a year before. I really did not like it because I went from driving a 4-door Toyota 4Runner to driving a 2-door Jeep Wrangler, and I did not like that switch. So I really did not enjoy my Jeep Wrangler. So once I found Turo, I was super eager to get this car out of my hair, to start driving my 4Runner again, and to have my Jeep making me some money. I definitely did not buy my Jeep with the plan of listing it on Turo. It simply worked out that way, and it ended up working out extremely well. I ended up listing it out on Turo. It got rented out about a day later, and then the rest is history. From then on out, it was permanently listed on the Turo platform, and I no longer used it as a personal vehicle. Now, whenever it comes to listing your personal car out on Turo, there's kind of 2 different paths that you can pursue within this one single path. Either A, you can do what I did, and you can list your personal car out on Turo, and you could keep it listed on Turo full time and never drive it for personal use again. This is, of course, going to be very applicable if you're somebody that has a secondary car that you can use, or if you're somebody like me who didn't enjoy the car that you were driving. But I also understand that this is a luxury that not everybody has access to. Not everybody has a second car lying around that they can utilize in order to list their personal car on the Turo platform. So if you're somebody that falls into this category, what I would encourage you to do is I would encourage you to set a couple of days or a couple of weeks, if you can, aside where you list that car out on the Turo platform. And while that car is being rented out on Turo, you can instead drive a significant other's car, or maybe borrow a friend's car, or maybe even rent a car yourself. Now, I know what you may be thinking. Why would I rent out my personal car on Turo just to rent a car myself for a couple of days or for a couple of weeks? And the answer is because it gives you a taste of Turo. It allows for you to see if this is something that you can see yourself doing, either part-time or long-term. This is very, very valuable because there are a lot of people that get into Turo and then they very quickly realize that it isn't for them. And being able to come to that conclusion before you buy any cars, before you commit yourself to something, before you take out a loan for a vehicle, this is something that is very, very valuable. Getting a taste of Turo, even if it's just for a couple of weeks, can answer a ton of questions that you may have. It will be able to give you a sense of what it's like to be a Turo host, and most importantly, it will help you decide if this is something that you want to go all in on. I believe that renting out your personal car is the first step that every single person should pursue if they're wanting to get into Turo, even if you don't plan on keeping that personal car on the platform. It allows for you to get your feet wet into the world of Turo before diving headfirst into it. It allows for you to see if Turo is worth pursuing for you as far as the time commitment, the potential abuse, the different aspects that you have to deal with as a host, and it of course allows for you to see what a day in the life of a Turo host actually is and if that fits your lifestyle. Now, the second path that you can pursue, either in conjunction with using your personal car or potentially after you've used your personal car to test the Turo waters, is financing a vehicle. This is definitely not my favorite path, but I think it's probably the most viable one for brand new Turo hosts looking for your first car. The reality is, not everybody has cash lying around in order to buy a cash car. And because of this, financing a vehicle could be a good path for you. Now, whenever you finance a car for the sake of renting a car out on Turo, I would encourage you to keep a few things in mind. Number one is don't buy a new car. You want to buy a car that has hit its depreciation bottom, or alternatively, one that's kind of close to hitting its depreciation bottom. Additionally, is to make sure that you can afford the car payments with or without Turo. I see a bunch of different Turo hosts out there that have a multi-car Turo fleet, and 100% of those vehicles are financed. And though this is definitely one way to pursue Turo, I personally think it is very, very risky. I always ask myself the question of what would happen if Turo closed tomorrow. And for me, the answer to that question would be I would simply sell all of my cars and I would probably go into real estate. But if you have a bunch of different vehicles that you finance, then you are very quickly going to be in a really bad financial spot. Now, I know the entire idea of Turo closing its door down tomorrow is a really far-fetched idea that is not going to happen. But the idea of having a car not able to be rented out on Turo is definitely not that far-fetched. In fact, this is something that did happen to me. I had my Maserati Ghibli, which was financed, the car was wrecked, and while I was waiting for the settlement for this wreck to come through and I was waiting for the money from Turo, I had to still pay for that Maserati's monthly payment. During this period of time, I had to pay that monthly payment out of my own pocket, and it ended up being a few $1,000s. If I wasn't able to afford that, I would have been in a tough financial spot. I believe that financing your first Turo car can be a really great way to get into the Turo business model, but I would be very cognizant of not using financing too much. Don't finance a bunch of different Turo cars, don't spread yourself too thin, and make sure that you're always able to pay that monthly payment with or without Turo. If you use financing wisely, then this is definitely a viable option. Method number 3 is on the exact opposite end of the spectrum, and that is cash cars. This is the method that I use in order to grow my own Turo fleet, and the entire idea of this is using cheaper cars like $5,000 to $7,000 vehicles that are paid for entirely in cash in order to grow your fleet, and then you rent them out on Turo. I have 15 cars on Turo, 100% of them are paid off in cash, and almost all of them were cars that cost me about $6,000, if not less. Now, the benefits of this business model are obvious, and that is that you can buy cheap cars, you can own the cars outright, and you can make some really great ROI. I've talked about this a lot on this channel. I personally believe that buying cash cars is the best method to pursue with Turo, and whenever you compare this business model to other business models from an ROI perspective, the numbers just don't lie. It is insanely profitable. But similar to what I was talking about earlier on the point of financing cars, I also acknowledge the fact that not everybody has $5,000 lying around in order to buy a Turo car. And so for many people, financing a car simply isn't an option. So though I do think that this is the best route to pursue, I also think it's financially the safest route to pursue. I also acknowledge the fact that it's not a realistic option for everyone who wants to do it. So if you're somebody who's wanting to get into the cash car game, but you don't have the cash in order to do it, I would encourage you to, number one, go the route of renting out your personal car, or alternatively, financing a vehicle and then putting aside all of the money that you make so that you can save up enough to then buy a cash car. Additionally, you could use money from your day job, or you can start another side hustle with like a gig app in order to make some extra money and then use that extra money in order to buy a car. For example, whenever I was getting started with Turo, I basically used all of the money I was making from my job at the time, and then I piled that money together to buy as many cars as I could until I got to the point where my Turo business could sustain itself and I could use my own Turo profits to buy all of the cars that I use to expand my fleet, which is what I do today. Cash cars is definitely the method with the highest ROI. I also believe it's the easiest method to scale, but I would argue it's probably one of the hardest business models to get into because of the fact that you have to have cash on hand. The fourth method that you can pursue, and one that I don't talk about enough on this channel, is a partnership or finding investors. Now, the idea behind this is that you, being the person who wants to run or start a Turo fleet, would manage vehicles for somebody else. In this scenario, it would be an investor. So an investor would provide you with a vehicle, and then you would manage and operate that vehicle on Turo. Now, the way that this oftentimes works out for people who pursue this path is one of two ways. Number one, the operator will charge a flat fee. So basically, the investor that provides the car pays the operator maybe $300 per month, and then they run the car for them, and the investor has a passive investment. Another more common option is profit sharing. And how this would work is the investor would provide the vehicle, and after all expenses have been paid, the profits are split amongst the operator and the investor. This is sometimes a 50-50 split, sometimes a 60-40 split, sometimes a 70-30 70-30 split. It would all depend on what you determined prior to making this arrangement. Now, this is a really great route to pursue for a number of different reasons. Number one is it allows for you to get into Turo with virtually no upfront cost on your end, as well as no risk. The investor is taking on all the risk and all the costs, which means you're able to really easily get into this business with really no downside. You would then be able to make money off of these cars that an investor provided to you. Ideally, you would save that money so that you could eventually buy your own cars. Now, I know I said I was only going to mention 4 different strategies in this video, but I do want to offer a bit of an honorable mention, and that is a lease. Now, in my opinion, I think that you should avoid leases at all costs. They are simply not worth it for the sake of getting into Turo. With leases, you are taking on a lot of risk because if a guest goes over in miles, or if a lot of guests go over in miles, you risk going above the mileage limitations laid out within your lease, which can be very, very costly. Also, leases oftentimes explicitly prohibit peer-to-peer car sharing. And lastly, one of the big benefits of Turo is building equity into the vehicle that you own. And whenever you lease, you're not ever able to build equity. And because of that, you're basically renting a car to then rent that car out on Turo. I just simply do not think it's worth it. And if you're going to go the lease route, I would just rather go the finance route, because at least when you finance, you can build equity into that car. But like always, you guys, I wanted to make this video because there are a lot of different ways to get started with Turo. And though my favorite business model, the cash car business model, is a great route to pursue, it definitely isn't the only route to pursue, and there are a lot of different options that you can choose based off of your own experience, your finances, as well as your long-term goals. Like always, if you have any questions, comments, if you have anything to add, I would love to hear it, so make sure to leave a comment down below. And while you guys are at it, make sure to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next video.